He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday and Friday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content such as interviews and D&D campaigns at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hey everyone, thank you for tuning into another episode of Cryptid Clues, Campfire Clues. I am your host Taylor, and today we have a bunch of more newspaper reports associated with Bigfoot. But before I get into that, a couple of plugs. You can find us online at CryptidClues.ca, on our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Additionally, you can find us on Patreon, where you can get access to early ad-free episodes, including the Haunt of the Grassman campaign that Ruben has been working on. You can also reach us via email, cryptidclues@gmail.com. But without further ado, let's get into this. So these newspaper experiences, many are definitely from the past century and even beyond that. And like our first one here, taking place back in 1882, I actually have two separate newspaper reports for this particular event. They are spaced out, but I thought it would be interesting to recount them both, as they can corroborate the situation and provide separate insights and perspectives into this. So let's get at it. And I quote, "A strange creature captured above Yale. A British Columbia gorilla. Yale, BC, July 3rd, 1882. In the immediate vicinity of Number 4 Tunnel, situated some 20 miles above this village, are bluffs of rock which have hitherto been unsurmountable, but on Monday morning last were successfully scaled by Mr. Onderdonck's employees on the regular train from Lytton. Assisted by Mr. Costerton, the British Columbia Express Company's messenger, and a number of gentlemen from Lytton and points east of that place, who, after considerable trouble and perilous climbing, succeeded in capturing a creature which may truly be called half man and half beast. Jucko, as the creature has been called by his capturers, is something of a gorilla type, standing about 4 feet 7 inches in height and weighing 127 pounds. He has long, black, strong hair and resembles a human being with one exception. His entire body, except his hands or paws and feet, are covered with glossy hair, about 1 inch long. His forearm is much longer than a man's forearm, and he possesses extraordinary strength, as he will take hold of a stick and break it by wrenching or twisting it, which no man living could break in the same way. Since his capture, he is very reticent, only occasionally uttering a noise which is half bark and half growl. He is, however, becoming daily more attached to his keeper, Mr. George Tilbury, of this place, who proposes shortly starting for London, England, to exhibit him. His favorite food so far is berries, and he drinks fresh milk with evident relish. By advice of Dr. Hannington, raw meats have been withheld from Jacko, as the doctor thinks it would have a tendency to make him savage. The mode of capture was as follows. Ned Austin, the engineer, on coming in sight of the bluff at the eastern end of the Number 4 tunnel, saw what he supposed to be a man lying asleep in close proximity to the track. And as quick as thought blew, the signal to apply the brakes. The brakes were instantly applied, and in a few seconds, the train was brought to a standstill. At this moment, the supposed man sprang up, and uttering a sharp, quick bark, began to climb the steep bluff. Conductor R.J. Craig and express messenger Custerton, followed by the baggage man and brakesman, jumped from the train, and knowing they were some 20 minutes ahead of time, immediately gave chase. After 5 minutes of perilous climbing, and then the supposed demented blank was corralled on a projecting shelf of rock where he could neither ascend nor descend. The query now was how to capture him alive, which is quickly decided by Mr. Craig, who crawled on his hands and knees until he was about 40 feet above the creature. Taking a small piece of loose rock, he let it fall, and it had the desired effect of rendering poor Jacko incapable of resistance for at least a time. The bell rope was then brought up, and Jacko was now lowered to terra firm. After firmly binding him and placing him in the baggage car, off brakes was sounded, and the train started for Yale. At the station, a large crowd who had heard of the capture by telephone from Spoozum Flat were assembled, each one anxious to have the first look at the monstrosity, but they were disappointed, as Jacko had been taken off at the machine shops and placed in charge of his present keeper. The question naturally arises: how came the creature where it was first seen by Mr. Austin, from bruises about its head and body and apparent soreness since its capture? It is supposed that Jacko ventured too near the edge of the bluff, slipped, fell, and lay where found until the sound of the rushing train aroused him. Mr. Thomas White and Mr. Cuillin, C.E., as well as Mr. Major, who kept a small store about half a mile west of the tunnel during the past 2 years, have mentioned seeing a curious creature at different points between camps 13 and 17. But no attention was paid to their remarks, as people came to the conclusion that they had either seen a bear or a stray dog. Who can unravel the mystery that now surrounds Jacko? Does he belong to a species that are unknown to in this part of the continent? Or is he really the train men first thought he was, a crazy Indian? End quote. Now, obviously, I blanked out a couple things because I didn't feel comfortable repeating those and saying those terms. Again, this is from the 1800s, and they were not very self-conscious of how they wrote things and explained things back then. So, I digress. Now, we'll dive into another article here. This one is a month and 2 years later, as it's dated on the newspaper, but it is connected to this experience. And I quote, "The Cleveland Leader, Monday morning, August 11th, 1884. A Western what is it? A mysterious creature in British Columbia. The village of Yale, BC, is situated at the head of navigation on Fraser River, 90 miles above New Westminster, which was the capital of British Columbia until it was changed to Victoria. About 20 miles from Yale, on the line of the railroad, is a locality roughly known as Tunnel Number 4, where the extraordinary occurrences about to be related took place during the early part of the present month. Notwithstanding the improbability of any amount of prospecting resulting in turning up even the bones of the missing link, much less in finding an actual living specimen of this much debated being, the actual facts which are related concerning the remarkable appearance near Tunnel Number 4 would tend to bear out this theory of the subject. At different times during the past 2 years, there has been seen in the hilly country about the settlements a being whose personal experiences is variously described. One day, about a year ago, a party of young people from Yale went up the road as far as Tunnel Number 4, and there, disembarking from their cars, proceeded to spread themselves over the country in the form of a picnic party. The tempting meal had spread upon the ground, and young men and girls were seated in a circle preparing to enjoy the viands, where there was heard a loud crashing noise above their heads, and in an instant, without further warning, and was given by almost a fiendish yell, something between the shriek of a hyena and the Indian war whoop, there dropped into their midst of the spread a horrible creature as large as a man, covered with hair from head to foot, with long arms which he brandished about in a formidable style. As he vainly tried to extricate himself from the canned fruits, cold meats, jam pots, and to lay margarine into what he had unexpectedly tumbled. This was a surprise party for which no intentional preparation had been made, and in a moment there was a stampede, tumbling, heading down the hill, on whose crest the elaborate meal had been laid. The frightened picnickers so hastened their departure as to be utterly unable to give any coherent description of what had frightened them to the railroad men whose assistance they implored. A party fully armed was at once made up, and the scene of the sudden onslaught was carefully approached. The unwelcome visitor had fled, but before leaving, he had plainly helped himself to everything that took his fancy, and that seemed to have been guided by nothing but the opportunity. If he were a human creature and had eaten what was certainly gone, selected from every imaginable article of food, his remains would undoubtedly be found in a few hours. No idiot or other kind of man could possibly have eaten such a mixture and live. But if such was the case, the most careful search failed to result in finding the body. And after a protracted search, which lasted after a fashion for several weeks, the idea of his having died of indigestion or gout was reluctantly abandoned. One fact, which was demonstrated by the circumstances of this visitation, caused the believers in the Indian theory to be very deeply shaken in their convictions. This was that he had fallen from an overhanging limb of a tree, carrying a large piece with him, and the size of the limb was a good indication that the creature must be as heavy as an ordinary man, and hardly an Indian, as they do not usually climb trees. A few months later, another view of this strange being was had by some workmen on the railroad, but though they gave chase, they were not able to come up with him. He was not seen again until about 3 weeks ago, when he was not only seen, but caught. The spot where he was discovered was a series of bluffs, deemed inaccessible. A train was running from Lytton to Yale, when the engineer saw what he supposed to be a man lying close to the track. He whistled down the brakes, but just as the train stopped, the object sprang to its feet, and in an instant, the object was climbing to the side of the precipitous declivity with the greatest ease. The conductor, brakeman, express messenger, and a number of passengers at once gave chase, and after some perilous climbing, succeeded in corralling the creature on an overhanging shelf of rock, from which he could neither ascend nor descend. The ingenious, though rather cruel, method was now adopted for securing him. Dropped a piece of stone from above, which, falling on his head, stunned him, and he fell insensible. The bell rope was now procured, and after some expert climbing, he was reached, tied, and lowered gradually down to the foot of the cliff. He was placed in the baggage car and successfully transported to Yale. When it was found that he had recovered from his insensibility, he was tractable and docile. One of the men in the railroad shop assumed the care of him, named him Jacko, and very soon made his friendly acquaintance. And even then, ended up to the present time, it had not been satisfactorily ascertained to what race the new discovery belongs. He is of the gorilla type, but not definitely enough to be declared a gorilla, which is, moreover, a creature unknown to the latitude of British Columbia, while there has been no menagerie there to introduce even a monkey. He is about 4 feet 7 inches in height, and weighs 127 pounds. His entire body, except his hands and feet, is covered with black glossy hair about 1 inch in length, but his forearm is much longer than that of a man, and so strong that he will break a stick by wrenching or twisting it, so large that no man could possibly accomplish this feat. He makes a noise, half bark and half growl, but is generally quiet. His favorite food is berries, and he drinks fresh milk with evident relish. His captor intends taking him to London for exhibition, and his exact position in natural history will probably be discovered. End quote. So I can say right now his exact position in natural history, I don't think that was ever discovered. However, there is a lot happening in these reports. While this 1884 report claims the Yale train situation happened weeks prior, the 1882 report dismisses that, but what the 1882 report lacks is the detailed report of this hairy man attacking a picnic, although it includes other men seeing this thing out and about. All in all, we have 2 very interesting sightings, followed by this third one that's reiterated by both newspaper reports with the train team. Whether this cryptid actually made it to London, I do not know, but I almost want to say juvenile Sasquatch. Being 4 feet 7 inches, that's relatively small. But before we continue onwards, we're going to jump to a quick ad break, and we will be right back. And we're back with an interesting report from July 11th, 2008, and I quote, "Hunting the elusive Sasquatch. A 7-foot Sasquatch has been spotted near Chilliwack," a witness says. And 2 local Sasquatch hunters are convinced the sighting, reported last month on Mount Jeem, is the real deal. "This was a legitimate sighting, not a bear, not a deer, or anything else," said Bill Miller, a full-time Sasquatch hunter who lives in Harrison Hot Springs. The Sasquatch was sighted on June 19th at 2 a.m. when a husband and wife were traveling down the mountain after watching the city lights from a lookout point. The wife was busy fiddling with CDs when the creature crossed in front of them. He grabbed his wife's arm and said, "Did you see that guy cross the road?" said Tom Steenberg, a Sasquatch hunter and Bigfoot author, who interviewed the couple 2 days after seeing the sighting. His wife started asking him questions, like what was he wearing? He said that he wasn't wearing anything. He was just really hairy. She asked how tall he was. He just said that he was really big. And finally, she asked him, was it a Sasquatch? No, he replied, it couldn't have been. There's no such thing as a Sasquatch. The man who saw the figure described it as having long arms down to his knees, a very heavy big upper body, a thin waist, a flat stomach, and no neck, just kind of a head. He compared it to being big like a wrestler, flexing its back and chest. He also said it was about 7 feet tall, covered in black hair, and walked on 2 legs. He said they came around the bend, then something took a step up from the trees and out onto the road, said Miller. It took only 2 quick steps across the road, looked towards them, and then it was gone. Miller, who has been a Sasquatch hunter for 10 years, and Steenberg, who has been one for 28 years, investigated the site in the following days. We looked for signs of where it might have gone into the bush, and I found it immediately, said Steenberg, who has investigated over 500 Sasquatch sightings in his career. I saw exactly where it stepped. They found elongated trackings of crushed sprouts and pine needles, measuring a few feet in length and over 4 feet apart. Although there was no Sasquatch hair found at the scene, and the road was too hard to leave behind any detailed footprints, the 2 hunters still believe there is enough evidence to prove that the Sasquatch had passed through. It's too problematic to explain it as a hoax rather than accept it, said Miller. Who would be running around out here in this ankle-breaking country in a gorilla suit on a warm night, sweating their tail off, jumping in front of cars? The tracks led all the way down a steep 60-meter hill covered in branches, trees, and shrubs. Miller believes that if someone was playing a prank, they would have only waited at the side of the road instead of struggling uphill in the dark. As well, the tracks were in a straight line. According to Miller, this is even more supporting evidence, as a Sasquatch has a mid-tarsal break in their foot that allows them to walk 1 foot directly in front of the other with ease. If I or any other human were to climb this hill, I would need to turn my feet sideways to stay balanced, he said. But these footprints are in a straight line, like he was walking a tightrope. They even go straight over a 2-foot-high shrub in 1 step. This is circumstantial evidence. The footprints also prove the sighting couldn't have been just a bear. End quote. Now, if you tuned in or you haven't yet to do so, our last episode that dropped earlier this week about Harrison Sasquatch goes into some more depth about foot castings affiliated with Thomas Steenberg, as well as some encounters. Definitely check that out. But I really, really do like this experience. To me, this is the ideal setting. Is you're in a vehicle, you're passing through, and you just see it as you're going by. You know, you aren't caught out in the middle of the woods away from your car. You have a nice piece of glass and metal keeping you and the other thing separated, because I think some of these situations can get a little bit uneasy, especially if you don't have a quick getaway method and you have to run or be escorted out of the woods by something like this. It's very, very unsettling. But I digress. And now we come to the final newspaper article of this episode. And I quote, May 16th, 1977. Driver sees Sasquatch near Mission. Mission. A bus driver and 4 passengers claim they sighted a dark brown Sasquatch with a light-colored face crossing Lougheed Highway Sunday morning. 19 miles east of here, driver Pat Lindquist halted his Pacific Stage Line's bus and chased the 7-foot-high animal through the heavy underbrush before losing sight of it. Full-time Sasquatch hunters who arrived at the scene a few hours later said the footprints it left behind are the best they've seen in 16 years. Lindquist, a former reserve Vancouver City policeman, told the Mission RCMP he was traveling westbound when he saw it walk north across the highway near a dry creek bed. Lindquist said he first thought it was a prankster, so he went after it to chastise the masquerader. He lost sight of it momentarily, he said, then noticed a stench like rotting meat. He pushed aside some undergrowth and spotted it, about 20 feet away. Lindquist estimated it was 7 feet high and weighed about 300 pounds. It had flared nostrils, he said, and breathed heavy. Lindquist's anger turned to fright, and he ran away. He drove 1 mile to a telephone booth and reported the incident to police at 8:56 a.m. Although Lindquist was the only person who pursued it, investigating officer Robert Eiford said in an interview Sunday that the other witnesses, whose names were not released, gave consistent descriptions of the initial sighting. Police tried tracking it, but were unsuccessful. On the south side, the tracks came from a bed of rounded 4-inch thick granite rocks. They disappeared to the north in thick undergrowth. Later that day, 3 full-time Sasquatch hunters, news media, and hundreds of motorists converged on the scene and created a traffic bottleneck for several hours. The creek bed was obliterated with their tracks, except for an area about 15 feet long, 150 feet south of the highway. A ring of about 40 spectators was focusing on 5 footprints being measured and remeasured in the center of a sandbar. They were 14 inches long and at the toe about 1.5 inches deep. Its stride was long. The tracks are 4 feet, 9 inches apart from heel to heel. The tracks have deteriorated quite a bit since this morning, Eiford said. Some rain fell on them before we covered them up. He said it would have been difficult for a human to make the tracks because the creek bed was hard packed before it rained. If someone wanted to fake the footprints, he'd have to do it with about 300 pounds on his back, he said. I'd have to see that to believe it. Eiford said when he arrived at the site in the morning, his footprints were barely visible. I don't think it was humans. There were no other footprints around. John Green, an author of 3 books on the Bigfoot phenomena, described the tracks as a pretty well standard model, although smaller than usual. Last time I saw tracks this authentic was in California in 1967, Green said. Another full-time hunter, Dennis Gates, agreed with Green's assessment. At first look, they are the real thing. For once, we've been getting a lot of hoaxes lately, Gates said. With the help of 2 plywood Sasquatch feet attached to a pair of boots, Green hopped atop of Gates' back to compare the prints. With a combined weight of 350 pounds, the 2 sets of prints were roughly the same depth. The 2 men and another colleague, Rene Dahinden, later made 2 casts of the authentic footprints. Green said it is unlikely the prints are a hoax because the width of each foot across the toes varied. You would have to have mighty sophisticated equipment to do that, he said. Green predicted each additional sighting would convince people that Sasquatches exist. But the conclusive proof will come when someone shoots one so the scientists have a body they can put on a slab, he added. Green described the animal as a higher primate with a number of possible ancestors. It's versatile, can swim really well, and sees in the dark. He said it's comparable to a gorilla and that has a large brain but doesn't make use of it. Green said its diet includes meat, fish, evergreens, shoots, and leaves. We said there is no evidence that a Sasquatch will attack people. The latest sighting near Sunday's site took place 8 miles to the west, Green said, by 2 boys fishing at Norrish Creek last year. The last publicized sighting in BC took place April 2nd near Spuzzum. Richard Mitchell, 16, said he saw the 7.5 feet creature with long, black, greasy hair from about 100 feet away. End quote. So, fun foreshadow fact, our next main episode, dropping Monday, will consist of myself and Ruben actually taking a deep dive into the diet of a Sasquatch, based on what we know with current primates and witness reports as well. Just kind of learn a little bit more about what they're going to be eating out there. Fascinating thing. Now, in regards to the evidence not supporting Sasquatch attacks, as referenced in this last newspaper article, I don't know if I really believe that. I think anyone that's had a trailer tipped or shaken, a tent whacked, or escorted out of the woods is subject to an attack, or at least a pending one. The ones who don't report the attacks are probably the same ones who are missing in 401 cases in national parks, if you ask me. But I don't have the evidence to support that as a claim, so it's all perspective, situational. However, that is all the time we have for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. As I mentioned prior, Ruben and I will be back this upcoming Monday with another Sasquatch-filled episode. But until then, you can find a ton of our other content at CryptidClues.ca, our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook for episodes and updates, as well as our Patreon where you can get ad-free early episodes. And if you want to say hi and reach out to us, send an email our way via CryptidClues@gmail.com. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and remember, take care and stay safe.